Many, many years ago, after Solomon died, King Solomon, who was king over the United Kingdom of Israel, after he died, his son Rehoboam took over and split the kingdom wide open, split it into two, divided the kingdom. We call that the divided kingdom. It was the United Kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon, but it became the divided kingdom once Rehoboam divided it. Rehoboam was the king of the southernmost part of that division, and we call that Judah. And the northernmost part of that division was a king by the name of Jeroboam, and he was over that, and we call that Israel. So we got Israel and Judah, and they were divided. Over the course of times, there was a lot of different kings that come in and out of Israel, the northern kingdom, and they were all bad. Every one of them were terrible. We get kings that had queens like Jezebel up there. Terrible kings. And then God just said, I'm done with you. So he sent the Assyrians in and took them away into captivity. About 727 years or so before Christ was born, they were carried away captivity, never to be heard from again. And there was 10 tribes up there of the 12 tribes. The two tribes down south was Benjamin and Judah, and that southern kingdom was known as Judah. And they had some good kings, they had some bad kings, some very good kings, some very bad kings. And one day God said, I'm done with you. You got some bad people up there. And Isaiah's down there preaching to them, saying, you got to straighten out. Jeremiah's down there preaching to them. You got to straighten out. But I'm telling you, you're not straightening out. You're getting worse and worse and worse. And God's going to let the Babylonians are going to come in and they're going to attack you and they're going to take you into captivity. And he did. Nebuchadnezzar was that king that was over the Babylonians. And he came into the southern kingdom and he attacked Jerusalem, tore down their walls, destroyed Solomon's temple. It was just an awful mess. They took away captives, a lot of people, among which was Daniel. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego took them away into Babylonian captivity. Over the course of time, the Babylonians lost their kingdom to the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians during Daniel's day. He was a young man when he got carried away captivity. He was like 80 years old when the Babylonian captivity fell to the Medes and the Persians. And at that point, 80 years old, he was thrown into the lion's den. But the king of the Persians says, I didn't want that to happen. He loved Daniel. After Daniel died, and people started migrating back to Jerusalem. God said that they would only be in captivity about 70 years. But a lot of Jews stayed in the Babylonian territory. And a lot of Jews migrated back under the leadership of the prophet Joshua and Zerubbabel, the governor. And they went back to Jerusalem and they built the temple a little bit. They worked on repopulating Jerusalem, right? But several years later, there arose a king. And his name was, I can't pronounce in the Bible, Ahasuerus, but we're going to call him Xerxes. The Greek name is Xerxes. Xerxes was the Persian king. By the way, Persia is located where Iran is now. It's the Iranian government. And the Iranian king, the Persian king, his name is Xerxes. And he knew about all these Jews. He knew about Daniel. He knew about the Jerusalem. He knew about all of the popularity of the Jews and the non-popularity of the Jews. See, when the Jews came over, God blessed Daniel. Daniel became like the third highest ruler in all of Persia. That's how powerful the Jews came. And a lot of his enemies, the Persians, they didn't like that. And they were anti-Semitic. They were anti-Semites against Jews. They hated the Jews. A lot of them did. A lot of them loved the Jews, but a lot of them hated the Jews. And Xerxes was the king of the Persian Empire when the Jews were kind of spread throughout the empire. Back home in Jerusalem, back here in Iran, present-day Iran, in Persia. They were all over the present-day Babylon, which is Iraq. They were just kind of spread throughout the whole kingdom. And the Persian king Xerxes was over all of those folks. And they had all kinds of bitter enemies against the Jews, and some liked the Jews. There was tension there all through the whole kingdom. One day Xerxes had a party, and he invited all of his influential friends and higher-ups, and he sent for his queen, Vashti. He told her, come and entertain my guests. And of course, that was going to be some awful entertainment. It was going to be some embarrassing entertainment. And Vashti said, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Now, if you're a woman, even today in the Middle East, you have no rights. And whatever you say against your man, you could be put to death for it. Imagine if you were the queen and your king said, come and do something, and you said, I'm not going to do it. Very bad things could happen to you. Very bad things did. He could have executed Vashti, but he didn't. He just kind of banished her from the kingdom. Well, that left him without a queen. He needs a queen. So he comes up with the idea, I'm going to look at all the women, the beautiful women throughout all the Persian Empire, which includes all the way over to Jerusalem, all the way over here to present-day Iran, the entire Middle East area and beyond. He said, I'm going to find me a woman to be my queen. And so they prepared women from all over the nation. Mordecai was a man, a Jew. His great-grandfather had been deported out of Jerusalem along with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Ezekiel, all of those guys. Well, his great-grandfather was one of those people that came out around 600 years or so before Jesus was even born. We are now about 480 years before Jesus is born. This is where we are in time. So about 150 years ago, Mordecai's great-grandfather was deported out of Jerusalem into captivity, and Mordecai had leveraged his popularity and power, and he is now sitting at the king's gate. What that means is he's either a messenger or he's got privy to the information coming in and out of the king's court, and he hears that Xerxes is looking for a queen. Now Mordecai has an uncle whose daughter, that makes her his cousin. Her name is Hadassah. Hadassah is her Jewish name. And he has raised Hadassah ever since she was a little girl. And he says, Hadassah, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you would make a great queen for Xerxes. But he's not going to hire a Jew. He's not going to marry a Jew because there's too much anti-Semitic feelings in the country. He's not going to have a Jew to be his queen. That'd just set the country upside down. But I tell you what, we're not going to tell him you're a Jew. We're going to change your name from Hadassah, the Jewish name, to Esther, which means in Persian, some people say, star. Your name's going to be Star. So we're going to send you among all the women around. And so among all those women, he picked Esther to be his queen. It's a God thing. It's a God thing. But she was beautiful, and Xerxes wanted her, and so he made her the queen. Now, because Mordecai was doing his duties outside the gates of the Persian courthouse and king palace, he heard some chamberlains talking, a couple of them, and they were conspiring to murder King Xerxes. All that went on all the time, even through the Roman Empire all the way back. You kill kings. You assassinate kings. You assassinate political authorities. So these two important chamberlains, maybe they were like senators or representatives of the kingdom, they were getting together and they were conspiring to assassinate Xerxes. Mordecai heard about it. He figured it out. He's watching. He's got his ears to the ground. And he tells Esther, he says, Esther, you got to get a message to the king that he's fixing to be assassinated. So Esther works it out and gets the right messages to the right people, and it gets straight to the king, and the king investigates it. He opens up an investigating with a special counsel, and sure enough, they find out this assassination plot, and they execute these two guys, and they get out what they call the chronicles. A chronicle is just a place that you write history. So they pull out a chronicle. They have chronicles every day. It's a daily journal. And they take this chronicle and they write in it that Mordecai sent messengers to overthrow a plot to assassinate and uncover it. And boy, that's great. So they wrote that in the chronicles, and they shut the book and they laid it on the shelf and write some more chronicles for some more news later on. And that book is sitting on the shelf somewhere. There was another gentleman, if we can call him a gentleman. His name is Haman. Haman was really getting himself recognized in the Persian Empire. And he was being promoted and promoted and promoted and promoted. And finally Xerxes promoted him to a very high position. Very important position indeed. And Haman was an anti-Semite. he hated Jews. He couldn't stand Jews. He didn't know that his queen, Esther, was a Jew, had no clue. Her name's Esther. She's a Persian name. Didn't know she was Jewish, but he hated all Jews. And one particular Jew that he hated more than anybody, any other Jew, was Mordecai. Because every time Haman, who was so important in the kingdom, would go out into the courtyard or go out into the gates and parade himself around, everybody would bow down and say, oh, there's Haman, he's wonderful. But not Mordecai. Mordecai would just stand there. And he'd say, no, I don't bow to men. I bow to God. I'm not going to give you honor and glory. And Haman just absolutely loathed Mordecai, this Jew. How dare he that this Jew would do such a thing publicly and embarrass me? I hate that man. Tell you what I'm going to do. So he goes to the king and he talks to the king about, he lies to the king. He does some things that are very heinous. Here's what he does. He said, oh king, I've been out and about through all of your empire. You've been sending me hither and there. And there's a people out there that hate you. There's a people out there that are against the Persians. Boy, King Xerxes, well, who is those people? We don't want any of these bad elements in our country. We want to root out the bad people. Who is the bad element? He said it's the Jews. You mean people like Daniel's people? People like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of our great-grandfather's people? Nebuchadnezzar loved Daniel. You know, they're bad. And Haman just worked it out to Xerxes. And Xerxes says, you know what? I hate Jews too. I can't stand those Jews. What are we going to do about them? Because they're going to overthrow our country someday. If we don't exterminate the Jews, we're going to commit genocide. How are we going to do it? Tell you how we're going to do it. On a certain day, we're going to put a law in the books. On a certain day, on a certain month of that day, of that year, there's going to be a law on the books that's going to allow all the people of the country to go to their neighbor, and if they're Jewish, kill them. And take their property. If they own a camel, take their camel. If they own a home, take their home. If they own land, take it all. And it's going to be legal. So all you got to do is just wait for that day to come, and we're not going to do anything at all to hold you accountable. We're not going to prosecute you. If you kill your Jewish neighbor, that'll be all right with us, and we're going to turn a blind eye. So it was in the books, and everybody's waiting on that day to happen. Mordecai hears about that law, and he says, we're going to die. There's no way that the Jews that are sparsely populated all over all the kingdom is going to be able to withstand that. We're all going to be annihilated. There's going to be a genocide of the Jews. And so he comes to Esther, sends a message to Esther. And he says, Esther, you got to do something about this. You're in a position to do something. You're the queen. Now, he don't know you're Jewish, but you're the queen. And let me tell you something, Esther, God's going to save us. I just believe God's going to save us. Who knows but what you were put in this position for this day, for such a time as this, to save your people from genocide, the whole nation of the Jews. Who knows? And I'll tell you something else, Esther, if you don't do it, somebody else will save us. Somebody else will save us, but you and your house, which is me, Mordecai, we're going to die. God will use somebody to save us, but who knows but what he might have picked you to save us. And so Esther sends out a message to all the Jews of the land. Pray for me. Please, 3 days, I want you to fast because I'm fixing to do something. I'm fixing to walk into the king unannounced. And if he does not lift up that sepulcher to receive me, law of the land, I can be executed. If he lifts up his sepulcher to receive me unannounced, then I'll live. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to risk my life. If I perish, I perish. So for 3 days they prayed and they fasted. And on a certain day, she walks up to that king and she's as beautiful as she can be. She made up her hair. She put her eyebrows up and got all kind of blush. She's gorgeous. And she walks in and he lifts up that sepulcher and she said, whoo, so she goes in and he says, oh, darling, you're so beautiful, you're so great, you're my queen. I'll give you anything you want, because obviously you want something or you wouldn't have risked your life to come and have audience with me unannounced. What do you want? I'll give you up to half of the kingdom, half of the Persian Empire. And she said, well, I just want one thing. I want to have a dinner. I want to have a banquet. And I want to invite you and I want to invite Haman to that banquet. So, okay, we'll have dinner. So they set up the time. The king comes to Xerxes. He came to Haman and says, you're going to have dinner with us. Oh, he was elated. Dinner, private dinner with a king and the queen. What a wonderful, wonderful thing for me. So he goes in and he has the dinner. And they're all having this private dinner together. Haman is feeling so good about himself, feeling so great. And they talk, well, what is it, darling, that you want? You're just going to tell, well, I tell you what, tomorrow night, I'll tell you what I want. I just want y'all to come back for another dinner, you and Haman, and I'll tell you what's on my mind tomorrow night. Oh, Haman walked out of that banquet on cloud 9. He walks up to his family and he says, oh, you're just not going to know. I had this great dinner with the king and the queen, and she wants me back tomorrow night. I must be in the great graces of the king. It's just great. It's wonderful. There's only one thing that's bothering me. And his wife said, darling, what's bothering you? Mordecai. Can't get that guy to bow down to me. I hate him. I wished he was dead. She said, well, I'll tell you what to do. Why don't you build a gallows tonight, right here? Build a gallows. We're going to hang Mordecai on that thing, and you'll feel so much better about yourself. And all you got to do is get permission from the king to hang Mordecai. He said, you know what, honey? That's a great idea. Build that gallows. The gallows was built. In the morning, I'm going to go and talk to the king, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get permission to execute Mordecai on that gallows. Can't wait for in the morning to get here. So he's just sitting there asleep, and he's hoping that in the morning to get here pretty quick so he can go get permission to execute Mordecai. During that same night, King Xerxes couldn't sleep. Maybe he had something bad for dinner at the banquet. I don't know. He couldn't sleep. So there he was trying to go to sleep, couldn't sleep. So he said, I'll tell you what, let me read some news. Let me read from the Chronicles. So they go out there to this shelf and they pull out this old dusty book. They open it up and they put his finger, and they just so happen to read in the Chronicles where Mordecai saved his life from an assassination attempt. And he said, hey, I'm wondering, did we ever do anything for Mordecai? Did we ever give him any honor, a medal of honor, or any kind of recognition for what he did for me? And they said, no, we never did anything for him. It's not in the Chronicles. He said, we need to do something nice for Mordecai. About that time, the doorbell rang, and it's Haman. And Haman walks in, and he says, hey, Haman, I'm so glad you're here. Haman's there to get permission to hang Mordecai. And the king, Xerxes, says, Haman, I'm just wondering, what would you do to honor somebody that the king wanted to honor, the highest honor? Well, guess who Haman thought he had in mind? He's so full of himself. He had dinner with them last night. They're going to have dinner tonight. Oh, he must be talking about me. So he says, I tell you what, put the king's robe on the guy, put his ring on his face, and put him on the king's horse, and get the king's most trusted prince of all the land and lead him in a parade all the way through the and say, this is what happens to people that the king wants to honor. That's what I would do if I were you. He said, that's a great idea. You're the best guy I got, the prince. Why don't you get Mordecai and put him on a horse and go do that? That made Haman sick. He was there to ask to kill Mordecai, and yet this gave the king the idea to honor Mordecai, and he's the guy that's got to do it. So he is going through the town giving honor. This is the guy that the king wants to honor, and he is mortified. He gets back home and he tells his wife just what a horrible day he had, and it was just so embarrassing, and it was just awful. He hates Mordecai, hates all them Jews, but there is some good thing. What? I get to have dinner with a king tonight. I get to have dinner with a queen tonight. So he goes to dinner. When they're at dinner, she says to him, after he asks Xerxes, well, what do you want now, darling? This is my second night with you. What do you want? And she says, well, I just want to save my life. What do you mean save your life? There's somebody out there that's trying to kill me. Really? Who would try to kill the queen? Haman's trying to kill me. Haman's face just went white. All the blood just rushed out of his head. What? She says, I'm a Jew. And as soon as she revealed that fact, Haman could have crawled under the carpet, and he was in trouble. And the king had to think about it. He went out on his balcony, and he started thinking about, what am I going to do? Well, in the meantime, Haman grabs Esther, and he begs her, please fix this. Don't let him kill me. He could kill me for this. And they fall over onto the bed, and about the time they do, here comes the king back in and says, Haman, You want to kill my wife. You want to take advantage of my wife. You want to do bad things to my wife's people. Hang him. Hang him right now. We ain't got a gallows. Yes, we do. Haman built one last night. Go hang him on that gallows. And he was hanged. And Esther came to Xerxes and says, you know, darling, I really appreciate you saving my life, but we still got a problem. On a certain day of a certain month, the law says that all the people can kill the Jews and there will be no accountability for it. There will be no prosecution for it. You got to change that law. He said, I can't. In the Persian bylaws, in the Persian constitution, if a king makes a law, it stands. And even the king himself can't change that law. Because on that day, at that time, it's going to happen. And nobody can change it. He said, but I tell you what I can do. I can write another law. And here's what I can say. The Jews have the right to defend themselves. If you go kill them and they defend themselves and kill you, we're not going to prosecute the Jew. We're not going to hurt the Jew if you try to kill them and they kill you instead. Sounds like a good reason. So sure enough, on that day, on that month, a few people started attacking Jews. But God was with them, and the Jews put that revolt down pretty quick. And that day is celebrated by the Jews even this very day. Look it up in your calendar. It's called Purim, Purim. And every year, about April I believe it is, they celebrate Purim, to the day that they were saved from the Jewish annihilation for what Esther done. Now what can we learn from that story? Number one, God has a plan. God has a plan. God knew that Haman was alive and hated Jews. He knew that the Jews were in danger of national genocide. And God put Esther in the place that she was put in to help save those folks. God knew it. Nobody else did. But God had a plan. But to recognize that plan, Esther had to be talked to, and Mordecai had to kind of share with her. Who knows? But such a time as this, God put you in this position to save us all. Maybe it's part of God's plan. She didn't know if it was part of God's plan. He didn't know if it was part of God's plan. Who knows if it's part of God's plan? So what did she do to find out, to work that out? She prayed. She said, in fact, not just me praying, I want everybody praying for me. Pray for me that God will use me as part of His. Folks, we need to do that. God has a plan for your life. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. But the way we connect with that is to pray about it. God, help me. Give me wisdom to be a part of your plan for my life. Ask your parents to pray for you. Ask somebody at church to pray for you all year long. Every once in a while, send you an encouragement to let you be part of God's plan. Let prayer be a very, very important part as far as whether or not that you are executing God's plan. God, help me fulfill your plan for my life. But you can know that God has a plan, and you can pray about it all you want, but you got to proceed. You got to go forward. Esther could have said, you know what? Maybe I am here as queen to save all these countrymen. And you have prayed for me for 3 days and fasted for me. And I appreciate that very much. But I ain't going to that king. I'm not going to walk into that throne room. I'll get myself killed. No, she didn't do that. She proceeded. She went and carried out what she thought was God's will for her life. And guess what? It was. So you can know that God has a plan for your life. You can pray about it all you want to, but you got to do something. You got to walk that aisle. You say, God, am I at liberty today because you want me to be saved? And people have been praying for me to be saved. They've been praying for me to obey the gospel. Well, let me tell you what. We can pray for you all day long. And God can have a plan to save you, and He does. He has a saving plan, a plan of salvation. But that won't mean nothing if you don't proceed. If you don't get out of your bench and walk forward and say, you know what? I want to obey God. I want to obey God. A key verse is what was just read in our hearing by Brother Jeff earlier. Esther 4, verse 14. Here's what it says. For if thou, this is Mordecai talking to Esther. Esther, if you altogether hold your peace at this time, if you don't proceed, if you don't get out of your bench and walk forward and do what God has told you to do, if you don't take action at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise from the Jews from another place. God's going to save the folks. God's going to save the Jews. God's going to save everybody that believes. Whosoever believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Let me tell you, God, you're not going to stop God from saving folks. God's going to save folks. He's going to save whoever believes, and whoever is baptized, God's going to save them. But thou, Esther, you who do not respond to the gospel, you and your father's house shall be destroyed. God's going to save the folks, but you're not going to be a part of that salvation. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? It may be that you're at liberty right now, today, on this Sunday, on July the 29th. God has a plan. He's had a plan of salvation for many, many years, but He's brought you here today for such a time as this to obey His plan. And that plan, He's put it out expressly in His gospel, in His Bible. Hear it. You've heard it. Believe it. I think you believe it. Repent of your sins. I think you're sorry for your sins. Confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. I think you believe that. And be baptized. Proceed. Proceed. God's going to save you. God's going to save folks, but He won't save you if you don't proceed and live faithfully. Do what you need to do to be saved. Esther certainly had a little bit of apprehension about it. She said, look, I'm going to trust God. If I perish, I perish. But she did not perish. God saved her, and He saved the nation. Folks, if you walk out of that pew and you come forward, I promise you, you're not going to perish. In fact, God will save you. And He may save folks that you're able to touch this week, this month, this year, in your lifetime. Why don't you come? While together we stand and sing.